Hello and welcome to Art and Self. I am Cindy Ingram, your host and the founder of Art Class Curator, Curated Connections, and the Art and Self Connection Circle. And I'm also the author of the new book, Art is About Being Whole, a memoir. This is the podcast where we experience the range and depth of what it means to be human, seen through our connections and conversations about intriguing works of art. These art conversations are here to show you that art is here for you as a catalyst, a challenger, a coach, and a comfort. If you love listening to these insightful conversations and want more connected content about connecting with art, I invite you to check out my new book, Art is About Being Whole, coming out on October 31st, 2023. You can get more information and sign up for book updates at artisaboutbeingwhole.com. Well, you might have noticed that I have been gone for a little bit of time. I have not recorded a new episode since June, and it is now October. But if you remember from my last episode, I talked about how the book Rest is Resistance had such an impact on me, and I felt the need to take some space after that. And I'm really glad I did. I took the summer, and the only work I did over the summer was working on my book and finishing it up. It's coming out in the next few weeks, and October 31st, which I'm sure you heard in the intro. And I also, did some traveling and had a lot of time with my family, and it was wonderful. So I am back to talk more about art, and today I have a really awesome guest, Margaret McDonald. Margaret has been in my program, Their Creativity Cocoon, and we have been sort of making art together for a few months, and it has been really fun to talk about our journeys with making art and how they're really similar. And I think that a lot of art teachers will really resonate with this discussion, but also people as a whole, because I know a lot of people have these built up versions of what an artist should be and are really disconnected from creating art themselves. So today we're going to talk about creating art, why we didn't do it for a while, why we're doing it now, and what an impact it has had on us and our belief systems too around art. So here we go. Here is my conversation with Margaret McDonald. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Art and Self podcast. And today I have an exciting guest for you today, Margaret McDonald. Hello, Margaret. Welcome.
Hi, Cindy.
Okay, before we get started and our conversation today, can you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yes, Margaret McDonald here. I am an art educator in the Washington, D.C. area. I live in Alexandria. I work in Arlington, and I am married, a lovely wife. My current role right now as an art educator is working as an adapted art educator with students in a program where students are ages 12 to 22, and they have intellectual disabilities, including significant mobility impairments. And so I'm adapting the classroom and the space and lessons to transcend barriers for them to access art and to create. And it's a really fascinating experience for me. I love it. I also do that half-time and also work with the general ed population K-5 as well. So that's
Excellent.
where I'm at right now. And actually, I'm also in grad school, so keeping busy with that too.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Oh wow. Oh yeah, that's a lot. I was just thinking we should probably have you back on the podcast after you've been at your school for a little bit longer and have a conversation about your adapted art curriculum, because I'm sure there's a lot of people who have
I would love that.
Love to learn about that. But today, what we're talking about is our journey with making art. Margaret has been in my program, The Creativity Cocoon, and then also Curated Connections, which creativity cocoon kind of merged into. And we've had a lot of chance to sit and make art together and talk about the process of making art and how we used to make art and how it changed as we've gotten older. So I thought I'd have her on to have that conversation with you all. So why don't we start with just kind of talking about your experience making art and like maybe your history of art making.
Yeah, as many share, I think as we hear a lot of artists share, like I've always loved drawing and doodling, and that's has been my experience as well. As I became an art educator and got my first, big girl job teaching, my art making um, became a little bit more of a chore. And I found that I really desired to create, but I didn't have what I might say a good muscle. And wasn't, I didn't really have a toolbox on how to strengthen that creative muscle. I can remember when I first started teaching, and individuals would find out that I was an art teacher. Other friends and adults and community members, they would often ask me, well, what kind of art do you make? Are you an artist? And I would say, yes. And well, what do you make? And I would say, a little of everything. And that was true because I was still discovering who I was as an artist, which there was nothing wrong with that. But I felt a little shame about that because I felt that I should know who I am as an artist. I felt like I should know if I'm a painter or a sculptor or um, fashion design. I felt like I should have that down. And I have around my house, I can see in my decor stages of my artistic development. I have a mosaic coffee table where I was dabbling in and doing mosaics on all surfaces I could get my hands on. I have pottery in my cabinets and my dishes because I was taking wheel throwing pottery at a rec center because I was like, I'm going to try this. And I have some printmaking because I took like a printmaking course and lots of different things. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I found that I felt like I needed to have some sort of trade or some sort of really skill that I could hone. And I wanted it to be pretty. I wanted it to make me money. I wanted it to sell. I wanted to be able to show it off and get lots of kudos. So for a while, I didn't really feel fulfilled as an artist. And then I just kind of stopped making art because I didn't feel good about what I was making. And I just kind of quit. And I think that when I was in college, as an art educator, we did have to take a lot of different courses. I remember taking Peruvian textiles, and then I took jewelry making and metals. And I took some of these things that honestly didn't really help me in art education. I mean, they gave me some various contexts around teaching art, but I don't know, I had these kind of underlying messages that you won't really be able to get to do any of that stuff because you're going to be a teacher and that's going to be what you do. So I kind of stopped making art for a long time.
Yeah. And okay, so I'm going to show my history too, just because they're different, but then we kind of, I guess in the last little bit of time, it's been really similar. So I also grew up as the child that loves to draw, and I was constantly drawing, and I wanted to be a Disney animator desperately until I realized at that time it was just drawing the same figure over and over again, slightly different. I was like, oh, that doesn't sound fun. But then I discovered art history, and that's when I really I fell in love with art history. But in college, I remember, and I went to high school art classes and middle school art classes, and I always remember being like, knowing I was good at it, but knowing that I wasn't great at it. Because there was always like a couple kids in class who just knew how to do it. Like they could just naturally make these amazing works of art and these amazing drawings without ever having to like try, and they just did it. And I was like, why do I have to work really hard and I can't even come close to how good they are? And that, that started to happen in high school, and I started to realize, oh, maybe I'm just not good enough for this. And then I get to college and decided to do an art history degree, but then I was in a drawing class in college, because with the art history degree I had to take 4 studio courses. And I was trying so hard. I loved that class because it was like, covered in charcoal at the end of every class, and it was just so fun to sit there and make art. But the teacher told me in like my final critique, he said, we put out my drawings and we're in the hallway, and he said, you are the hardest working student in this class. And he was like, you try so hard. And then, and yeah, I'm like, yeah, I do try hard. And I felt seen. And then I got a B. And then I was like, okay, if I did my very best and I tried so hard and all I can get is a B, and then I was always a straight A student. So it was like getting a B was like not okay. And I was just like, well, I guess that is true. I guess I'm just not good enough. And, there was these kids in class who didn't try hard, who I'm sure got A's, but they just knew how to do it. They saw it differently than I did. And so I lost a lot of confidence in my ability to make art, and not only my ability to make art, because I knew I was good and it just wasn't great, but I lost confidence in my ability to improve. And then I also, at the same time, lost confidence in my ability to have ideas that were good enough to be as good as all the art history that I was studying. So I didn't believe that my ideas were good enough, and I didn't believe my like skill was good enough. So I went full force into art history, spent 20 years teaching it and loving it, and I still love it. But it was definitely, and I would make art, like, I'd make the posters at the schools, like for the pep rallies or whatever. And I would like play around here and there, but I never like seriously made art after college because of that. And I don't know, I don't even remember if it was an official decision. It was just a really subconscious, that drawing class was like the one thing though, because it was like, yeah. And then it was over the last few years where I had this like yearning to make art, and I was like kind of thrown aback by it, and started doing it, and like taking apart all these stories that I'd been telling myself over the last 20 years of like what it means to be an artist.
Right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I found that the point where I started to have a desire to make again was when I had some students ask me about my art. And some students asked me what kind of art I made. And it occurred to me that if I was going to tell my students that they could be creative, then I needed to believe that I could be creative. And I didn't believe that I could be creative. And that struck me. And so I realized that I had some work to do. And then I realized that I needed to figure out how I was going to believe that for myself. If I didn't believe I was an artist, how am I going to convince someone else that they can be an artist if they want to? And so that's when I kind of started to think, okay, maybe if I just start making, then I can be an artist. And I think that's a philosophy that I have now, that you can be an artist if you want to be an artist. simply just start making, and there you are. And so I would make a few things and maybe bring in something to show my students, and my students begin to believe me, right? So when I tell them things or teach them things,
Mm.
it's believable. Even just giving them simple directions, they had a little more buy-in. This lady is trying to tell us about this, and I believe her a little bit more now. You know, and so, and that's also this like notion that artists are among us and not just this these old masters
Yeah.
that we will never meet, and they're just this idea that was from so long ago. So that's one thing that can occur to me.
Yeah, I love that. And I always felt, I think, yeah, there was a part of me that was teaching, even though I knew like my depth of knowledge of art is deep. I know the media, I know the processes, I know the techniques, I know the art history. Like I've dedicated my entire life to art. But there was always a part of me that was like, I'm a fraud. Like I'm
Mhm.
not. And even running art class curator, which is a site dedicated to teaching with works of art and art appreciation, there was still this like nagging thing that was like, you don't have the credentials for this because you're not making art, you're not, it was like there was it was like this undercurrent of like inauthenticity or shame or something like
They're
uh,
going to find
under it
out.
all.
They're
Uh-huh.
going to find out eventually that I'm not who I say I am. Like someone's going to find out.
Uh-huh. Imposter syndrome
It's yeah.
sneaks up.
Mhm.
Yeah. And did you ever have the experience of, and the more art teachers I talk to, the more I think maybe we're all doing this, but that I would go into like a training with other art teachers and we would have to make art in the same room with other art teachers. And
Mhm.
like that is the most terrifying experience because I'm like, oh, they're gonna find this is when they're gonna figure it out because I'm gonna be
Yes.
next to someone who's gonna be brilliant and I'm not gonna be able to do anything. And it's like, oh, it's terrifying.
Yes. Yes. And I find that I just stop. I have found a couple times when we've had those professional developments where we're all in there kind of making an example to take back. Um, I often will just kind of cut out things and just make a little pile of my stuff and be like, I'm going to finish this later when I get home. I have little mini panic attacks
Yeah.
because I that perfection makes me freeze, and
Hmm.
I now looking back know that it's that the lie I tell myself is that I can't, like, making bad art is better than just
Yeah.
dive in there, make something.
Yeah. It's fascinating. And I am really curious. I should do some sort of survey. And like, how many of you have this exact same experience? I really feel like it's most of us.
Hmm.
Um, but it also, as you were talking, it made me think of that phrase, which I hate, those who can't teach, those, and it's like, I think that's part of it too, is like that phrase is always maybe in the back of my head. Like,
It's a toxic phrase
it is terrible.
that
Yeah.
infiltrates our subconscious and creates doubt that um, I mean, teaching is a superpower in itself that has skills unrelated to the actual content. So
Yes.
teachers do have skills that are a whole nother bag that's unrelated to what you're actually teaching. So teachers have these skills to implement supplies and content and all that. Um, but teachers themselves are individuals that have a lot of skills, and uh, so yes,
Yeah.
I agree with
Oh,
that.
and then it made me think too, just now as you were talking, that maybe that phrase is from the patriarchy because mostly women are teachers. I wonder if it was another way to undermine women. Hmm.
Well, and first teachers were men, and then when women wanted to come out of the home, they started teaching, Yes, this is
Hmm.
a whole, mhm.
Yeah, there's a whole thing here. I bet I was like, someone's written an essay on this and I'm going to find it. Okay.
Yes.
So both of us in like we both had different experiences in terms of our like what was happening about our making art, but we both had this feeling of um here is how an artist should be, and here is how I am, and I am not an artist because I am not doing the things that an artist should be. So what were some of the things that you thought an artist should be?
I thought an artist should make something that sells
Hmm.
and hangs in a gallery and yeah, that makes them money, or that looks pretty, or that is appealing. Um, and yeah, or an artist is someone that's successful, um, and that other people love what I make. Um, and that I would make for other people, which is a really good realization to have. I remember um, anytime I would make something, I found a lot of the things I made over time, whether it was my pottery or I did a lot of like, I did various crafts. I started doing a lot of very crafty
Yeah.
stuff before I kind of made what I'm making now. Um, and I would just give it all away. And anytime I would give someone something, they would say, "You should sell these, do a craft." And I would be like, and I just felt this ick inside me, like I feel like that's what people want me to do, but there's some disconnect there. Like I don't really want to do that. So I'd keep making and keep giving it away, keep hearing people say I should sell it, I should set up a booth, I should set up a shop online, and I never did because there was something inside of me saying, "That's not you, Margaret. That's not you." And I was listening to it, but I wasn't really buying into that real Margaret, because I kept making things and giving them away.
Hmm. That's
Which is nothing
interesting.
wrong with making things and giving away, but I feel like I was making for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
Like Christmas gifts and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So your art used to be, it was something you made for that person
Right. Like I would say,
originally, and that
okay,
was,
Christmas time's coming up and I need Christmas gifts for everybody. So I'm gonna make a bunch of art so that I have Christmas gifts for everybody.
yeah.
But that's really the only time I was making
Yeah. For other people.
for other people.
When you're in my early 20s, I was very broke and I made paintings for everybody, and they're like portraits of themselves, and they're terrible. And I feel so bad for my family. They probably like still have it, and they're like, what do I even do with this thing? I'm like, they're not good. I mean, maybe they are, but they're just, I don't know. It was funny. Mine weren't like pretty tiled things or whatever. It was like, no, here's a portrait of yourself, which is exactly what you want. Um, Okay, so you thought, it was making for other people, and even like making to sell, making money off of that, that too is a making for other people um thing. And then one other thing I too wanted to point out, and I'm gonna see if I can remember it. It was a should that I noticed. Oh yes, it was a should that I noticed earlier when you were talking, was you had mentioned you were kind of experimenting with a lot of different media, and that
Mhm.
in your head, like to be an artist you had to pick one. Was that?
Yes. Yes, that I had to be the girl who makes mosaics that are shiny. I don't know. Like
Yeah.
yeah, and that is just not that's yeah. And my art is going to evolve. I know it, and
Yeah.
change, and it already has. And I think that's what makes me a great artist, is the fact that it's a representation of me and where I am. And
Mm,
yeah.
yes. Okay, so before we talk about your art now, I was going to talk about my shoulds that I had too, that I thought an artist had to be, and this was very much informed by a lifetime of studying art history and looking at art and going to museums. Is I thought that to be an artist, you had to have a brilliant, meaningful idea or something important to say, and then you had to come up with the idea before you even made the art, and then you have the idea of exactly, you know exactly what it's going to look like before you even make it, and then you make it, and then you have all the skills to make it exactly as you imagined it. And so I, in my head, like there was this like, oh, I don't have the idea, so then I can't do it. But then I, at one point in my life, like it was probably like 5 or 10 years ago, in the last 5 to 10 years, I started to have ideas where I'd be like, oh, this would be a good painting. And I would have an idea, then I'd be like, oh, I don't have the skill to even make this happen. And then I would start painting it, I'd try it, and I'd be like, I don't like to paint that way. And so it was just like this weird disconnect. And so I had to dismantle that belief that I had that you had to have the idea first. And then it's all planned out, and then the job is then to execute the idea.
Mhm.
And some artists are like that. There are many that do that. But there are many more that don't. They just sort of start making and then see what happens. But I was convinced you had to, that was the only way to make art. And I just like, I can't do that because I know that's not my personality. I don't plan anything. I just get an idea and do it. Like I just early, like if I'm cooking, I just throw things in a pan. I don't look at a recipe. If I'm going on a trip, I don't look at tour guides. I just show up and I start walking around like that. I don't do anything that way. And so
Right.
why would I think that art has to
You're
be
going
like
to
that way?
limit yourself
Yeah.
if you wait for that grand idea. Yeah, you're going to
Yeah.
limit. Yeah.
Yeah. So both of us were kind of walking around as art teachers, telling our students they can be artists when we ourselves didn't believe it, didn't believe it, because we had all this made up bullshit about like what we should and shouldn't be and how we should and shouldn't go about making art.
Right.
And then before we talk about our art now, I want to like, I remember when it was like one of our first creativity cocoon sessions, we were talking about college, and you had a really, I remember you talking about what it was like to be an artist in college, and you had a story about like going to, and how it felt to be at the art supply store. Do you remember this story that I'm talking about?
Um, Briefly, was I talking about, I don't know, tell
It's
me.
like how you were like immersed, you were like really immersed in art making, and it like brought you all this joy, and like you were full all in, and like like it became like your whole life. Does that ring a bell?
I remember talking about that. Yeah. Well, I remember maybe I was talking about how when we had this art store called Plaza Arts, and when I was studying at art school in Richmond, and I would go there and walk up and down the aisles, and they had, I don't know if this is what I was talking about, but I do remember oh, you know what? Maybe we were talking about, we were sitting here talking and we were talking about, I had a little, I'm not sure where it is right now, but
Yes, you had
I
something
had a
on your
little,
desk as a
I had something
reminder.
on my desk that triggered this. I think it has fallen down now, but it was a little tube of paint that was all
Yes,
dried
that
up
was it.
that I
Yes.
um, had hung here to remind me. That's what it was. I had hung a
Yes.
little, it was a little tube of like yellow ochre paint. Here it is right here of chroma. Um, oh no, cadmium yellow paint.
Yeah.
And it's all dried up, but I had it hanging here because to take me back to that time in college when I was, like you said, immersed in art making, very like supply, like looking at all those supplies. And I loved going to the plaza art store and just walking up and down those aisles, and they would have, all those pencils, and you would go in and pick just like one color of one pencil and purchase just one pencil and like walk out of there. And it was just such a precious time, I remember, in my life, where I was making and creating and valuing the medium. And I can remember my professors talking about supplies and would send me. I remember when I was working in the jewelry class, they would say, there's this one woman who lives on this one street who we buy our jewelry, our silver from. So I want you to go to this address. She's the one that we use. So I would drive to this and was down these roads in Richmond. And when I think back on that time of valuing the process and gathering the supplies and the making and the organizing and keeping everything, it's a really cozy moment for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why I have this dried up paint that I can't get anything out of, still hanging here in my art space, to remember that that's who I am. And that's what I love about my artist self. Is I love materials, and I love walking up and down. I love the smell of art supplies. I love the smell of art stores. And yeah, so, and nobody can take that from me.
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad you remember the story, because I was like, I know there's a story and I remember it being so good, but I don't remember anything about it.
Right.
So I was like, hopefully we'll get there. but we did. Because as you were
Yeah,
talking, I was like,
did.
oh, there's something hanging in her room. And then you remembered it right after I did. I was like, good, she got that. But I love that too, because at the time when you told me that story, I remember I had been keeping my all my drawings from college. I had this, the cardboard, folded cardboard with the duct tape and like all my charcoal drawings inside. And I had this other thing with the handle, and I had all my things from my design class. And I carried them from house to house, apartment to apartment my whole life. And then just before before I started the creativity cocoon, just a few months before, I hadn't made art and I knew I needed to. And I threw away all of that stuff. We were cleaning out the garage. I was like, what am I doing? Why? I don't open these. I don't throw them. I have pictures of everything. I don't open any of it. So I was like, I got rid of it. And then like right after I got rid of it is when I started making art again. I think like that like trauma of college and not being good enough, like I needed to release it. But like yours is totally different, because yours is like this like beautiful like happy memory of who you are. Mine was this like something else. But those stories, like those things that we keep with us that make a big difference. So anyway, I love that story, and I know all of the art teachers who are listening to this resonate with that, and that like we've all done that. Like, do I really spend $9 on this one pencil? You're like, I'm gonna do it.
Yes. Right.
Like, and it's gonna be amazing. Or
Yeah.
$19 or whatever. For me, it's paintbrushes. Like I have a hard time turning down like a really beautiful, expensive paintbrush. Like they're so wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So we're teaching, we're having all these stories holding us back. We're not making art. We're feeling like a little bit of imposter syndrome, a little bit like frauds inside. And then we decide to make art again. So you told the story of how your students, it was because of your students. So what was it like starting to make art again? What did you start to make, and how has that process unfolded?
So when I started to carry just a little sketchbook around with me, just a little like pocket sketchbook,
Mm-hmm.
um, and started there, just something that I carried in my purse and would doodle. And I really started to I would say, ignite the passion to create when I started to hear people talk about intuitive art making. And that really resonated with me. And intuitive art making can be described as, for my understanding, is you create based on how you're feeling in the moment and what's happening within yourself right here, right now. And so this can speak to your comments about having like this grand idea that you're then going to implement. Well, that is not really what intuitive art making really is. And so I started to look up different ways to do intuitive art making. And one of the ways was just to do mindful scribbling. And so I started doing that myself, and I began to really like it. And so it's probably in 2019 or 2020, so not that long ago, I started to do just mindful scribbling, where I would just take a marker and just go and just scribble and just move my hand across the page. And I started to find that when I was working and drawing, that my inner dialogue, my thoughts began to slow down. And I started to ask myself, I wonder if this is why I always was coloring and drawing during when I was a kid and we were watching movies as a family. And we would go to church. I would have my coloring books. If as a kid, subconsciously, as a kids, we do things we know are good for us without really always being told. And then we kind of lose that insight, I think, as we get older. Mm-hmm. And so it was a good reminder that this was helpful for me. And so I started to explore materials, and there was this craze happening with the Posca markers. And so I jumped on that, and I found that I love Posca markers. And I started to explore materials. And so that's I started my art at this point in time is very intuitive. I don't have a plan. And it's very much for me. It's very much for to help me organize what's going on up in this crazy brain, to discharge it onto the paper. And I eventually sometimes weeks, months, days, will feel really good about what ends up on the paper. And that is a result of exploring materials and just making art, even when it's doesn't necessarily mean anything, just putting it on the paper.
Yeah. I'm writing some things down because I have like 5 tangents, like not tangents, yes, are related to things you said, but I'm like, oh, we can talk about that. We can talk about that. Where do I go first?
Right.
I love when that happens, and also hate it because then I'm like frazzled. Okay. So one, in my book, which is coming out October 31st, Art is About Being Whole, I talk about my journey of making art, but my art journals that I've created over the last few years are used as design elements in the book. And I have one that I did as I was traveling, and I wanted to bring my art journal stuff, but I didn't want to bring all the messy stuff. So I had Posca markers and I had different things or whatever. And I was like, I'm going to do a drawing like Margaret does. I had the big Posca marker and I did this big scribble, and I was like, scribbling with Poscas and stuff. And then I like watercolored over it, but whatever. And so like, and in my head, or that was it. It was like, this is just, for Margaret. And so my designer who was designing the book put that in the book, and I had named them all, and I named that one a la Margaret. And she was like, why is it called that? I was like, that's the whole thing. And so in the book, actually the title of it, I don't know if it's all a Margaret. It might say for Margaret McDonald, but your name is actually on the credit line for that artwork. So anyway, I wanted to tell you that story because it was fun, and I did really like making art that way. I haven't done it since because it's your way of making art, it's not mine. So that's my little side story about that one.
Love that story.
Yeah. So you're in my book. The second is I love what you said about art being for you. And it reminded me, because that's, well, let me tell my story, and then I'll make the connection because it's about mine too. So,
Yes.
yeah, I had the moment. It was December 23rd of what is it? It's 2023 now. It's 2021. It was December 23rd, and I was like pondering, I was like meditating on like, what do I do to show people the power of art or whatever? And I'm like trying to think of how do I do this? And then like this otherworldly voice like comes in my head, like, and it said, with your art. And I was like, I was like, no, that was like, it was like a very distinct, like, absolutely not. That's not happening. That it was that response. And also I can't make money doing that. That was the second response I had. So that taught me a lot of things, but it was such a clear message. And I don't really believe in like a God telling me things like that. Like, I don't know what it was that voice in my head was, but it was such a very clear thing that I was like, couldn't ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about it. I was like, I keep pondering it, and I'm like, okay. And then I get COVID like right after that. So all I had to do was just lay there and think like there was nothing I could do. And so I'm like, can I make art? What do I even do? Like, so, I was like, and so I was like, well, I don't have a space for art. So then I built a whole space, and like that took 7 months, and didn't make any art during that 7 months, but I was planning. And then I made the space. I had all the supplies organized in the space. The space was made, still wasn't making art. And that's when I decided I had to force myself up there. And that's when I added it to my programs. Cause then I was like, if people are going to be there to make art with me, I have to actually do it. So that's when I started to do it. It was like it was forced accountability. But what I did learn during that when I started is I decided I was going to do art journaling because I had the same experience as you, is that a lot of the art I had made had been for other people in the past. It was like at one point I was making like wood block print cards, and I was going to sell them. And then there was like, the terrible paintings I made for my family. Which I've never talked to them about since. I should bring those up again and be like, aren't those terrible? Y'all can tell me now. It's okay.
Right.
But it was always for other people. And it was always like, there was always this undercurrent of, I need to be impressive. And this needs to be good, and people need to like it, and people need to admire. They need to admire me. So there was that. And so, and I was like, well, art journal is going to be perfect because one, I can't give it to anybody because it's stuck in this book. And then, two, like if I don't like what I'm doing, I just turn the page and I'll allow myself to experiment. I didn't even know what media I wanted to do. So I just kind of put everything near me. And so I had a bunch of stuff, art teachers just have all the things. And so and what I learned is the exact same thing that you learned, was that it is 100% about the process and just letting it unfold. And it's about like what happens when I just sit down and do it. It calms my nervous system. If I'm anxious, I'm not anxious anymore. It's so soothing, and I don't come in with any notion of, well, this is what I'm going to make today. I just start, and then whatever happens. And what happened is I started making stuff I really liked, which was really exciting. I wanted to share it, but it's not like, it never came from a place of, I'm going to make this thing to share. It came from a place of, I want to make this thing, and it's how I'm feeling today. And these are the colors I'm resonating with today. And that's the image that I found delightful. And I think this is really funny, and it's not going to make sense to anybody who looks at it, but I think it's funny. And it was just delighting myself. And then I end up making things that I like, I'm really proud of. So, I think it's fun that we both kind of came at this like, oh, art is not about selling or being impressive, or it's about something else.
Absolutely. One of the things you said that was really powerful for me as well is the idea that I also, when I started making in your group with the creativity cocoon, I started making in a sketchbook. And that also helped it be for me, because this book is for me. And a couple times I have considered ripping a page out and giving it to someone. And I just haven't, because I I sit down and I work in this book, and it's low stakes.
Yeah.
It's just here. And sometimes I hate what I make, but it's not that I have stopped hating myself as an artist. I
Hmm.
just don't really, you know what? I just don't really like that color, or I just not a fan of that material. And that doesn't make me a bad artist. That actually makes me a great artist, because I'm actually learning what works for me, what works on this paper, and blah, 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 blah. So I think learning that about myself, loving myself as an artist, is my goal.
Yes.
That I can, and when I decide to make something for someone else, I can, because I first made it for myself.
Hmm.
And then when I make someone fun, I felt like I sometimes I would get a little resentful, like, oh, I made all these amazing things, and then I have to wrap them up and give them to other people. And it's such hard work. Well, I think people who make things and sell them, it's great. That's, but I really wanted to make things for me. And now I get to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so good. Um, okay. There's something I was gonna say, and then I just got caught up in listening. Like, and it was so good. Okay, I was hold on. It was, you talked about the sketchbook, and then you talked about it being for you, and then oh yes, sorry, it was the like not liking. It wasn't when you didn't like something that you made. It wasn't that you didn't like you. It was you just didn't like that. And that I just really want to point out that moment because it kind of gave me
Mhm.
chills. It's really powerful because I think as creators we do tie ourselves with what we create, and it's hard to distinguish between ourselves and the things that we create.
Mhm.
And when you come at making art from that perspective, uh, that could be really harmful. I've listened to Elizabeth Gilbert's book Big Magic a million times, and I just finished like my fourth listen to it. And she has a chapter that is don't make art your baby. Your art's not your baby. And she talks about it as like it was a way to sort of separate yourself from what you've made and not personalize it so much and not tie your whole self-worth to something that you've made. Because if someone says, if it's a lot of her examples are writing because she's a writer, but she's like, if someone says, you got to cut 1/4 of your story because of space, she's like, you can't cut up your baby. So it's like with your baby, you can't cut up your baby. And so it's a really good chapter on how to do that because it is very very hard to do. So yeah, I've made many art journals where I'm just like, this is terrible. But then I'm like, can I make it more terrible? And then I'll just like keep making it terrible. And then I end up finding something I like because I'm just like,
It
what if
shows
my
such
goal is making something terrible?
it shows such growth in
Yeah.
the artistic journey, to be able to forgive the materials, forgive the process, and turn the page or come back to it later,
Mm-hmm.
and see that as part of work. It's work. It's part of artwork,
Yeah.
and it's very much growth.
And it's fascinating because you look at even like the study of art history, they have, all of Da Vinci's sketchbooks are somewhere and Van Gogh's and all the things. And they did that, they just were constantly experimenting and trying new things and sketching. And somehow in my head, I became like my first thing I make has to be as good as a Picasso painting when you're like, Picasso experimented 1,000 different ways before he ended up with that like masterpiece. Why do I think I have to just spit out a masterpiece? So it's a bashing of perfectionism and a focus on process that has been so meaningful to me um,
Yes.
doing this. Okay. So we've learned a lot about ourselves and about art making through this. Like, what do you think is going to happen next with your art making?
I, for me, I want to keep creating, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure what's going to happen. Um, I think I still need to I will say this. I think I want to make a little bit bigger.
Hmm.
I have been making pretty small, like as we in terms of scale.
Yeah.
So I am um the funny part is I've been using this giant Posca marker that's like a humongous chisel tip, but I've been using it on small like paper. But I love the giant chisel tip. And I found myself telling a student today, I said, I can relate to drawing small when you're nervous, but don't forget that you can draw big. It's take the risk and draw big. But I do that too. When I doubt myself, I'll just draw it small because it's safe.
Mm,
And I told that to a kid today as they were drawing. And so I'm reminded, I think I'm going to maybe try to do a little bit bigger, get some bigger canvases or some bigger paper.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. When you catch yourself saying something that you're not actually following in your real life, you're like, oh, self, why
Yeah.
did you just do that to me? Uh, I
Right.
found that when I was writing the book, I found that all the time. I would be writing a chapter about something that happened like 5 years ago or whatever. And then like something in my life was happening that was like very similar to that moment that I wasn't following the advice that I'm sitting there writing. And I was like, I gotta listen to myself. And then I would kind of resent myself a little bit. But as you were answering that question, I realized I asked the question wrong. I asked you like, what do you think is going to happen next? And really, how are we to know? Because that's not what we're
Oh,
doing.
right.
So the question then is, yeah, what are you feeling called to try next or something like that? Which is that's what you ended up answering. But yeah, I realized I asked the question completely wrong.
What
Yeah.
about you?
I actually have no idea. Like there's something different now happening. I do need to learn how to do it when I'm not forcing myself on accountability because I don't have as many like cocoon sessions and don't find myself going up there as often. So there's something that is preventing me from going up there as much as I would want to. Um, and then two, I've noticed that I think because right now I'm really stressed in my personal life and my work life, like the book and everything, like there's a lot happening that I get up there and I just all I want to do is just like paint. I've just been painting the backgrounds of art journals like a solid color. I'm like, this one's gonna be lime green. And then I'm like, what am I gonna do next? I'm like, I don't know. I turn the page and I'll do like I'll paint one orange. I'm like, that's all I want to do right now. And so I'm just allowing that to happen. But it's interesting because like I don't feel as inspired, but I also like it's not about that. It's about like what I feel like doing and that's what I feel like doing. So yeah, I don't know. It's like right now it just feels like really mysterious. Like I don't know. I am doing a collage a day thing, like divide the spread up into 8 and I'm doing like little mini collages or little mini artworks every day. And so I'm on like for October. So it's October 5th. So I've done 5. Um and that's fun because it's just like it takes like 30 minutes. And so I know I can get up there and do that. And so that's kind of keeping me like
Right.
engaged in the process because I do start to avoid it. If the longer I am, the more I like don't want to go back up there because it's still not like habit and it's still not like my body does know and it does know that it feels good, but it's like it's not 100% like
Well, as you were saying that, I'm remembering some of the creative cocoon sessions where we would check in about what were we working on, and um, I would not, I just would not really know what I needed to work on, wouldn't really have something specific, certain page. And I would do exactly what you said. I would just open up to a blank page and just lay down color. And um and I feel a little some of the same tone of voice as you were saying, kind of like, I don't really know if this is, it's just where I'm at. And I kind almost like a little undertone of self-doubt of like,
Mm, yeah.
this is not really a good day of art making, like this is not
Yeah.
really,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
not really participating today because I'm just laying down color. But what by the end of the session, maybe I had flipped back to another page, or I was really proud of myself for the color I had laid down,
Yeah.
or getting a few backgrounds done. So I just remember like that is part of doing the work in the book.
Yeah.
And so I remember those sessions.
Yeah, 100%. And the ones that I would be like, oh, I don't really feel like doing this today, but I'm like, well, I'm the leader. I got to just show up. And by the end, I always was glad I did it. Like every single, there was not once where at the end I was like, that was a waste of my time, and never. It was always like, oh, I'm so glad I did that. So it's just like a memory. But you're exactly right. There is a little bit of judgment in my that is happening with myself right now about the art that I am doing. And that's sneaky.
It's sneaky.
It's the productivity culture, it's the patriarchy, it's all the things, all the things
Yes.
ingrained in my psyche. But because that's what is true with the book. Like I went to a writing group every day, Monday through Friday, and I decided, I was like, if I'm going to write this book, I have to go, and I'm going to go every time. I was like, I'm not ever going to miss it. Unless there's an emergency, unless I will schedule everything around that. I was like, I'm just going to show up. I was like, whether I feel like it or not. And then some days it was like just staring at the blank page. Some days I got a lot done. Some days I edited. Some days I deleted an entire chapter. But it was like, it was never like, I made a beautiful piece of writing today, like every day. It never was like that. Some days I'm like crying because I just, like brought up a lot of emotion. So then I have to like think about my emotions for an hour. It's different every time. And it's the same with art. And I just need to keep remembering that it's all part of the process.
Right.
So,
Absolutely.
well, excellent. I think that we have really adequately covered this topic. Is there anything left for you that is kind of at the tip of your brain that you feel is unsaid?
We covered a lot. I am excited to keep creating with you on the so you have the sessions that meet once a week, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with curated connections. We have one today in an hour. So yeah. And tell everybody where they can find you online if they want to follow along.
Yeah, so I am at my personal Instagram is at bright blue hue underscore. And I also have an Instagram where I post a lot, all things adapted art ed, which is at adapted art ed. So I've got two places where you can follow along. One is my stuff, and the other is all adapted art ed. Thanks.
Wait, we will link to those um, Instagram pages in our show notes so they can follow along. I love following the adapted art ed stuff. I love following all of your stuff, but the adapted art ed stuff is really fun for me to see like all the things that you're experimenting with, and
Yeah.
it's really cool. Well, thank you very much for joining me today. This was a delight.
Thank you.
All right, thank you again to Margaret McDonald. And if you want to hear more about my journey of creating art and see some of my artworks, they are in my new book that's coming out on October 31st. Art is About Being Whole. You can sign up for book updates at artisaboutbeingwhole.com. And in the book, my art journals are used as design elements throughout, but then I also have a few chapters at the end that kind of chronicle my journey of art making. So that will be coming very soon, and I cannot wait to share it with you. All right, I will see you next time. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to Art and Self. And if you love listening to these insightful conversations and want more connected content about connecting with art, I invite you to check out my new book, Art is About Being Whole, a memoir, coming out on October 31st, 2023. You can get more information and sign up for book updates at artisaboutbeingwhole.com. Also, please consider leaving me a rating or a review on iTunes and share this episode with one friend who needs to hear what we talked about today. You'll find links to the artworks we discussed over on the show notes, and you can find me on Instagram and Facebook by searching Cindy Ingram Art and Self. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next time.